Tetris, a well-known game from the early days of video game history, is clearly the most influential piece of 20th century art, and I'm about to tell you why. Within art forms such as music, movies, and video games, it's not surprising for many to be washed away by time. The few that stand anchor themselves as great, popular, and influential models of these art forms. We remember great movies, but we rarely remember the bad ones because, you know, especially they just nobody wants to watch a bad movie a second time unless they're so bad they gain a cult following, and then that's a whole different story. Now, especially with these new, more modern art styles, such as movies and video games, who haven't really had much of a history, especially video games, when you consider that really we've only gone, if they've got like less than 100 years of history, that's not a lot of time for them to grow. Yet, when you look at the first video game and you look at the new modern ones, it shows an immense amount of growth, very quick growth. Video games, well, not the first thought that comes to mind when people think of art, is still art. Now, art is made to get a message across, or for the enjoyment of others, or maybe just because the creator wants to create it. And all of these are equally as viable. And now, video games are they are a mix of several other art forms, visual art, music, and things that weren't really considered art before. You know, nobody considers writing code art, but it's a major part of video games, and it's sort of like writing, I guess. Now, just as movies are art, video games can be described as interactive movies or just as interactive stories. They put the viewers inside the story, and in some games, the story is more obvious, like, say, Legend of Zelda, or I guess even Mario. But sometimes a game doesn't need a story at all. Sometimes the focus is the enjoyment of the experience rather than the story. And that's where Tetris comes in. Tetris, named for Tetra, meaning four, and tennis, the creator's favorite sport, was made in 1985 by Russian speech recognition researcher Alexei Pajitnov. Since it's this is what speech recognition does to you. Since its release, it has wormed its way into many people's childhoods. Tetris is about placing blocks, known as tetraminos, on a board where they then fall to the bottom. Now, all 7 blocks are made of 4 segments connected in different ways. That's why they're called tetraminos. Now, the goal is to place them without letting them reach the top. The way you do this is by making a filled row, which then erases them and gives you points. But there isn't a win. There isn't a victory in Tetris. Tetris is a game about survival, about only delaying the inevitable failure. Death is coming, and it's shaped like a Tetris piece. Now, due to a little bit of an oversight, a British businessman was able to get his hands on the licensing for Tetris. Why? Because faxes are legally binding, even if no contract is made. And so he literally asked if they could, do a contract or whatever. They said yes, and then he never contacted them again because they said yes, therefore he had the contract. What did he do with it? Well, he sold it to many companies, and just within the first year of it being worldwide, it sold over 100,000 copies, just in the first year. In 1988, just a couple years after its creation, the license, which technically should have only belonged to the Hungarian publishers and Russia, was in the hands of dozens of companies. Why? Well, that businessman handed over the licensing to a lot of people, or sold it to them, and those people sold it even further, leading to a chain reaction of epic scales. There's also, that's for systems. there's a lot of duplicates as well, but it does hold the world record for most systems. Now, after some, back and forth, some silly little shenanigans, Nintendo caught wind, and they wanted it. Only problem is that their rivals already had the license, and the businessman wasn't about to give them it. So they went to the original creator and told them what happened. And he officially learned that hundreds of thousands of copies had been sold. And he hadn't turned a cent. But he wasn't mad. He was actually happy. He wanted his game to be shared. Money's nice, but what's nicer is sharing joy. That was the point of the game. Now, after Nintendo and some very cool business partners told him, they were able to fix most of the licensing crisis, and the businessman got kicked out. Nintendo's hand on the game boosted its popularity to a whole new level. Their copies alone sell more than 20 million copies worldwide by 1992. By 2010, Tetris had sold 170 million copies. Now, all of this is very important to showing the influence of Tetris. There's another important thing. What are some interesting facts about Tetris? Well, let me call over my good buddy, Tetris Fact Blake. Now, let's talk about some Tetris. Now, the Tetris effect, as it's so wonderfully called, is a cognitive effect caused by Tetris, and many other things that cause the brain to create imagery of Tetris, or whatever is causing the effect, even when it's not in play. You're not doing the action. Now, for Tetris, that's imagining Tetris pieces floating through the air and connecting, or not through the air, but basically you imagine Tetris pieces. Basically, people who play Tetris a lot see Tetris pieces even when not playing. Now, comically, another known item to cause the Tetris effect is boats. Boats. Yet the only thing meaningful enough to get the name was Tetris. Tetris increases brain activity as well as the thickness of the cerebral cortex. Tetris is good for the brain. Tetris. I did terribly. Playing Tetris after a traumatic event will lessen the trauma. Well, only intrusive memories and flashbacks of the event. But if you are in a traffic accident, play Tetris or Candy Crush. It will help you. That's right. Tetris helps with PTSD.